The galaxy had known peace for centuries, and yet, deep in the void, a plan was brewing, one that would challenge the very foundation of that peace. The Exorthian Empire, an ancient and seemingly invincible civilization, had long watched humanity from a distance, dismissing them as primitive and weak. To the Exorthians, humans were a curiosity, nothing more than a fleeting speck in the grand scheme of the universe. They thought of us as little more than animals, barely worth their attention. But that, as they would soon learn, was a grave mistake. The Exorthians had their reasons. They were growing desperate, their empire stretched thin by endless war. Their once mighty fleets, filled with advanced technology and ruthless warriors, were starting to falter. It wasn't that they lacked power, but rather that the wars they fought had begun to drain their resources. The Exorthians needed to secure their dominance, and so they devised a plan to intimidate their enemies, an unprovoked attack on Earth, a world they believed would never stand a chance against them. They didn't just come with ships or soldiers. No, they brought something far more terrifying. They brought war beasts, massive, bioengineered creatures designed for one purpose: destruction. These beasts, bred for combat, had been unleashed on countless worlds before. They were unstoppable, terrifying monstrosities, each one capable of leveling entire cities with a single swipe of their claws. To the Exorthians, it was a surefire way to send a message. To humanity, it would be the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare. The first wave hit the ground like thunder, a storm of clawed beasts and armored soldiers descending on Earth's most defenseless regions. But what the Exorthians hadn't accounted for was humanity's ability to adapt to survive and to fight back with a relentless fury unlike anything they had ever encountered. The war beasts rampaged across the planet, tearing through forests and cities, their roars shaking the very ground beneath them. But it wasn't just the destruction that stunned the Exorthians, it was the response from humans. Men and women, soldiers and civilians alike, began to fight back. Not with advanced technology, not with weapons that could match the power of the Exorthians, but with something far more dangerous: their will. A small group of soldiers, led by a brilliant tactician, made a stand in a ruined city center. They didn't have the firepower to take down the beasts directly, but they had something far more valuable: an understanding of their own planet. They used the environment to their advantage, luring the war beasts into traps and ambushing them from every angle. The beasts, though powerful, were not invincible. And the humans were learning quickly. Each battle, no matter how small, became a lesson. With each victory, they began to uncover the Exorthians' weaknesses. The key to this fight was more than just brute force. It was the humans' ingenuity. They didn't need to match the Exorthians' firepower. They only needed to outthink them. In a war of attrition, humanity's sheer resourcefulness began to tilt the odds. It was a fight that wasn't supposed to be winnable, yet humanity was proving them wrong. But the Exorthians were not blind. They realized their mistake far too late. The war beasts, designed to crush any resistance, were being outmaneuvered by humans who had nothing but their instincts, their courage, and their drive to protect their world. The Exorthians responded by sending reinforcements, but each wave only seemed to bring more destruction and more resistance. The Exorthians, who had never faced such defiance, were beginning to question whether they had underestimated humanity's potential. As the battles raged on, something unexpected began to happen. The war beasts, once mindless tools of destruction, began to show signs of hesitation. Some even turned on their Exorthian masters. What had once been a well-oiled war machine was starting to fall apart. The human resistance wasn't just about survival, it was beginning to rewrite the rules of warfare itself. The tipping point came when a small, remote group of scientists made a stunning discovery. Hidden deep in the jungles of South America, they found something that would change everything: a piece of Exorthian technology that had been left behind. This technology, long dormant, had the potential to turn the tide of the war in humanity's favor. It was a power unlike anything they had ever encountered. But with it came a question: was humanity truly ready to wield such a force? Back on the battlefield, the Exorthians were losing control. The beasts were now acting erratically, as if they were waking up from a slumber of violence and destruction. The human resistance had gained momentum, But at what cost? As humanity began to reclaim its world, it became clear that the war was far from over. The Exorthians, humiliated and enraged, were preparing for a final assault, and the mysterious piece of technology could either be their salvation or their doom. What would the humans do with the newfound power? Could they harness it without becoming the very monsters they were fighting against? And as the final battle loomed on the horizon, one question remained: could humanity survive when the universe itself had underestimated them? As the stars above Earth flickered, signaling the approach of the next wave of Exorthian forces, the fate of the planet hung in the balance. The war was about to reach its climax, and the lines between predator and prey, conqueror and victim, were about to be blurred in ways no one could have predicted. But the true test was only beginning. Would humanity's resolve be enough to defeat the empire that had once thought them insignificant, or would they succumb to the very forces they had fought so hard to resist? The final answer, as always, would come down to one simple truth: never underestimate humanity. As the war raged on, Earth's landscape became a battlefield scarred by relentless destruction. Cities once teeming with life were now craters in the ground, smoke rising from shattered skyscrapers and fractured highways. The war beasts, monstrous creations of the Exorthians, had no mercy. They tore through every defense the humans could muster, their massive claws ripping apart anything in their path. Yet, despite this overwhelming power, humanity was far from defeated. It was as if something deep within the human spirit refused to break. In the early days of the war, no one expected Earth's inhabitants to stand a chance. The Exorthians had their reasons for this dismissal. They had conquered countless worlds before, worlds with advanced civilizations, far more capable of resisting their might than Earth. And yet, there was something about this planet, something uniquely human, that the Exorthians failed to understand. It wasn't the strength of their armies or the size of their weapons. It was the way humans adapted to impossible situations, finding new ways to fight back when all seemed lost. At the heart of this resistance was a group of civilians and soldiers who had come together in the chaos of the war. They weren't the elite military forces, but ordinary people who had been forced to take up arms to protect their homes. Among them was Captain Wren, a former combat instructor who had always believed in the strength of human will. She'd spent years teaching others how to fight, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined that she'd be using those skills in a war for the survival of humanity. Wren was a strategist at heart. She had an uncanny ability to read the battlefield, to understand how the enemy would move before they did. She was often the calm in the storm, her presence reassuring those around her that there was still hope. Her reputation grew as victories, small but significant, began to pile up. She was no longer just a soldier. She was a symbol of humanity's resolve. The humans weren't backing down, not by a long shot. But the war beasts, the Exorthians' ultimate weapon, continued to evolve. No one knew where they came from or how they were bred, but their sheer ferocity and adaptability made them the perfect instrument of terror. They were massive, each one towering over a building, with thick armored hides and claws that could cut through the toughest materials. The Exorthians had intended for them to be mindless, obedient tools of destruction, but something had gone wrong. The beasts, in their rampages, had started to exhibit signs of intelligence. They were becoming unpredictable, harder to control. At first, the Exorthians dismissed these changes. They believed the beasts were simply evolving due to the harsh conditions of Earth. But soon, they realized that the war beasts were learning. They adapted to every trap, every ambush, and every strategy humanity threw at them. There were whispers among the Exorthian commanders: had the humans somehow triggered this change? Or had the war beasts been hiding a level of sentience that the Exorthians had failed to recognize? As this new mystery unfolded, the humans discovered something unexpected. Deep in the jungles of South America, a group of scientists had uncovered a strange energy source, unlike anything seen before. It wasn't just advanced technology, it was alive. The energy source seemed to pulse with a rhythm. And as they investigated further, the scientists realized that this energy had a strange connection to the war beasts. Somehow, the beasts seemed drawn to it. Captain Wren was one of the first to hear about the discovery. She was skeptical at first, thinking it was just another rumor. But when she met with the scientists and saw the evidence for herself, she knew they were onto something bigger than anyone had anticipated. There was an ancient power on Earth, one that the Exorthians had no idea existed. The energy wasn't just a weapon, it was a force, and it was linked to the very creatures the Exorthians had unleashed. As the team of scientists worked to understand the energy source, they began to piece together an even more chilling truth. The war beasts weren't just mindless destroyers, they were, in some way, connected to the very planet itself. The energy appeared to resonate with Earth's natural forces, amplifying the creature's strength and aggression. It was as though Earth had been preparing for this war long before the Exorthians had arrived. But why? Why had the planet allowed such a powerful force to be dormant for so long? The more the scientists uncovered, the deeper the mystery grew. There were ancient ruins scattered across the globe, hidden away in remote corners of the world, that seemed to hint at a civilization far older than any known to history. These ruins were intricately carved with symbols that matched the energy source, suggesting that some civilization had once harnessed this power. But what happened to them? And why had they left behind such a dangerous legacy? Ren couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of discovering something far more dangerous than the Exorthians. What if this energy, this ancient power, wasn't just something that could help them win the war? What if it had a darker purpose? She knew that the wrong hands could turn this power into something unimaginable, something that could destroy not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. The Exorthians were ruthless, but humans weren't immune to corruption either. There was a growing tension within the resistance. Some saw the power as humanity's only hope, while others feared what it might unleash. As the days passed, the situation grew more desperate. The war beasts were growing more intelligent, and the Exorthians were sending reinforcements, massive fleets that dwarfed anything humanity had ever seen. Ren knew they had to act quickly. But every decision seemed to carry unimaginable risks. The technology they were uncovering could either save them or doom them all. One night, after a particularly brutal battle, Ren sat alone in a darkened command room, staring at the holographic map of Earth. The war beasts had struck again, this time in the heart of Europe. The Exorthians were tightening their grip, and the resistance was running out of time. The energy source was their last hope. But as Ren looked at the data, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if the war beasts weren't just responding to the energy? What if they were being controlled by it? Suddenly, an alarm blared, pulling Ren out of her thoughts. A new wave of war beasts was approaching, and they were headed straight for the hidden research facility where the energy source was being studied. Ren's heart raced. If the Exorthians took control of that power, there would be no stopping them. Ren grabbed her weapon and ran toward the command center. Her team was already preparing for the worst. But as they gathered their forces, Ren realized that they weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing something far older and far more dangerous than anything the Exorthians had ever known. The energy source was calling to the beasts, and soon it would call to them as well. They were about to find out just how deep this mystery went, and whether they had the strength to stop it. As Ren's team scrambled to prepare for the incoming assault, a sense of urgency hung in the air. The war beasts were fast approaching, their lumbering forms emerging from the tree line like shadows of doom. Ren had never seen fear in the eyes of her soldiers before, but tonight was different. They all knew what was at stake, and deep down, they all understood the fragile balance they were walking on. The energy source, hidden in the remote research facility, was Earth's last chance not just to survive, but to take the fight to the Exorthians. But as Ren scanned the faces of her team, she realized that the power they were about to unleash could change everything. There were those among her ranks who saw the energy as a beacon of hope, while others feared it might be their undoing. It wasn't just about fighting the Exorthians anymore. It was about what kind of humanity would remain when the dust settled. Sergeant Riley, one of the most seasoned soldiers in Ren's command, had become one of the most vocal skeptics of using the energy. Riley was a realist, someone who had seen the horrors of war up close. He knew that humanity's desperation could lead them down dangerous paths. This power. It's too much, he argued one night as they strategized. We're not prepared to control something like that. We could be opening a door that's better left closed. Ren knew Riley's concerns were valid, but she couldn't afford to back down. The war beasts were evolving, adapting faster than they had anticipated. Without the energy, humanity had no hope of defeating them. "If we don't act now, we'll lose everything," she replied, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "We have no other choice." The team's disagreement wasn't just limited to Riley. The resistance was divided, with some soldiers quietly questioning whether the energy was worth the risk. Meanwhile, others believed it was the only way to level the playing field. The stakes had never been higher, and with every passing hour, the decision felt heavier. The sound of distant rumbling shook Ren from her thoughts. The war beasts were closer now. The ground trembled beneath their weight as they crashed through the forest, tearing through trees and earth alike. Ren's soldiers gathered their weapons, taking their positions, but their eyes constantly flicked to the horizon, where the hidden facility stood vulnerable and exposed. As the first wave of war beasts appeared on the outskirts of their position, the earth seemed to pulse beneath their feet. The energy source was calling to them. Ren could feel it, a low hum vibrating in the pit of her stomach. It was as if the very air around them had changed, charged with a force that was beyond understanding. Her comms officer, Lena, suddenly spoke, her voice tight with panic. "Captain, we're not alone. There's something else out there. Something different." Ren's heart skipped a beat. The war beasts, though terrifying, were not new. But this was something she hadn't prepared for. From the shadows of the trees emerged another figure, smaller, more agile, but no less terrifying. It was another creature, but unlike the war beasts, it didn't lumber through the forest. It moved with purpose, a predatory grace that seemed almost deliberate. It was darker than the others, its body sleek and streamlined, like a predator designed for stealth. "What the hell is that?" Riley muttered under his breath, his voice low and filled with dread. Ren's eyes narrowed. The creature was scanning the battlefield, its glowing eyes briefly meeting hers before it disappeared into the thick brush. It was unlike anything they had faced before. The war beasts were tools of destruction, bred for overwhelming force. But this was different. There was intelligence in its movements, a calculated precision that suggested it wasn't just a mindless animal. And then, as if to confirm Ren's worst fears, the ground shook again. This time, it wasn't just the war beasts. The energy source, somehow, impossibly, was reacting to the new presence. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating more violently as the creature retreated into the shadows, its eyes never leaving the battlefield. The war beasts followed suit, their massive forms still and watchful, as if awaiting instructions. "Captain, it's connected to them," Lena whispered, a cold chill creeping into her voice. "The energy. It's not just attracting the war beasts. It's controlling them." Ren clenched her fists, her mind racing. She had suspected that the energy source was far more dangerous than they realized. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The creature, whatever it was linked to the energy, and that meant humanity had no idea what they were truly up against. In the midst of the growing chaos, Ren's thoughts turned to the scientists. The ones who had uncovered the energy source, the ones who had hoped to harness it for humanity's benefit. They had thought the power could be controlled, that it was something they could use to turn the tide against the Exorthians. But what if they were wrong? What if the energy was never meant to be used by anyone at all? Back at the research facility, Dr. Oren, the lead scientist, had become increasingly obsessed with the energy. He was convinced that it held the key to something greater than victory, something that could transcend the war itself. But even he had begun to wonder if they were tampering with forces that no one, not even the most brilliant minds, could fully understand. Oren had been working on a device that could harness the energy more efficiently, a device that he believed would give them control over the war beasts and any other creatures the Exorthians sent. But as the war dragged on, he had grown more withdrawn, his mind clouded by the sheer enormity of the power he was working with. The conflict wasn't just physical anymore. It was ideological. Some saw the energy as humanity's salvation, a gift from the earth itself, while others feared it was a curse, a weapon they could never control. As Ren stood on the front lines, the weight of the decision pressed down on her like a lead blanket. The war was no longer just about fighting for survival. It was about what kind of humanity would rise from the ashes of this conflict. Would they become the saviors of their world, or the architects of their own destruction? In the distance, the war beasts began to move again, but this time they didn't charge directly. They were circling the battlefield, their massive forms watching, waiting. The creature in the shadows was still out there, and with it, the sense that something far darker was about to unfold. Ren's comms crackled, the voice of Dr. Oren coming through, frantic. "Captain, you need to stop them. If they get to the facility, it's over. The device, it's not ready. We're not ready to control it." The words hit Ren like a thunderclap. The device wasn't ready? They weren't ready to control the energy? But before she could respond, a deafening roar tore through the air. The creature, the one that had been hiding in the shadows, emerged again, this time charging toward the research facility. The war beasts followed, their claws digging into the earth as they too broke into a run. Ren knew one thing: they had no more time. The choice was about to be made, and she had no idea what the cost would be. The ground shook violently as the war beasts charged, their enormous bodies cutting through the dense forest like living tanks. The earth trembled beneath Ren's feet, and her heart raced. She could feel the weight of every decision bearing down on her now. The creature, the mysterious force that had appeared from the shadows, was moving with a purpose toward the research facility. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkened night, but it wasn't charging like the war beasts. It was biding its time, circling as if calculating its next move. The soldiers around her tensed, their rifles aimed at the oncoming beasts, but Ren knew it was futile. The war beasts were too numerous, too powerful. Even with all their firepower, there was no way they could hold back such a relentless force. But it wasn't just the beasts she had to worry about. The energy, the source they had uncovered, had begun to hum louder. The ground beneath them pulsed with a deep, almost rhythmic vibration. Whatever was about to happen, it felt like the planet itself was on the edge of something monumental. "Captain, we need to move now," Riley shouted, his voice urgent as he gestured toward the facility. "We can't wait any longer. If we don't stop them, it's over." Ren's eyes darted toward the research center, a small dot in the distance, barely visible through the chaos. But it was the only place that mattered now. The device that Dr. Oren had built, the one meant to control the energy, was their only shot at saving humanity. If it worked, they might be able to turn the tide. But if it failed, Ren pushed the thought aside. Failure was not an option. "Move out," she barked, rallying her soldiers. "We hold them off as long as we can. The rest of you, to the facility. Now." The soldiers sprinted toward the research center, their heavy boots pounding the earth as they moved with purpose. Ren led the charge, adrenaline surging through her veins. She could hear the distant roars of the war beasts growing louder, closer. Her soldiers fired back in frantic bursts, but the beasts barely flinched, their thick hides absorbing the bullets with terrifying ease. It was as if they were barely feeling the assault. Meanwhile, the creature remained in the shadows, its presence unsettling. It didn't seem to care about the gunfire or the chaos around it. It was focused solely on the facility, and with each passing moment, its connection to the energy source seemed stronger. Ren couldn't explain it, but she could feel it in her bones. This creature, whatever it was drawing from the same power. And it was only a matter of time before the full extent of that power was unleashed. They reached the perimeter of the research center, and Ren's breath came in ragged gasps. The facility's walls loomed before them, fortified but still vulnerable. The air around them hummed with an unnatural energy, and Ren could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The war beasts were close now. There was no time for hesitation. "Get inside," Ren ordered, her voice firm but filled with urgency. The soldiers surged forward, entering the facility's thick steel doors. Ren took one last glance over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The war beasts were almost upon them, and the creature in the shadows was still waiting, watching. But this time, it wasn't just standing still. It was moving toward the heart of the energy source. "Captain," Lena shouted over the comms, her voice filled with panic. You need to hurry. The device. It's not stable. We don't have much time. Ren's pulse quickened. Dr. Oren had promised that the device would stabilize the energy, but from the sound of Lena's voice, something had gone terribly wrong. Ren pushed through the facility's entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. The lab was dimly lit, the hum of the energy source vibrating through the walls. She could hear Dr. Oren's voice echoing down the hall, but it was distant, muffled. Where's the device? Ren demanded, her voice tight with frustration as she stormed through the narrow corridors. Lena appeared from the shadows, her face pale, sweat beading on her forehead. It's here, she said, motioning toward a large chamber at the far end of the hallway. But it's not just the power, it's the creature. It's connected to the energy. It's drawing from it. We don't know what'll happen when we turn it on, but if we don't, we'll lose everything. Ren barely heard her. She was already moving toward the chamber, the faint sound of growling outside growing louder by the second. The war beasts were closing in, and whatever power the creature was tapping into was escalating with every passing moment. The walls trembled beneath their feet as the creatures closed in. As Ren entered the chamber, her eyes locked onto the device. It was a complex array of technology, wires pulsing with the strange alien energy. Dr. Oren stood beside it, his face contorted with anxiety. It's unstable, Oren muttered. It shouldn't be like this. We were supposed to be able to control it, but now we need it, Ren interrupted, her voice sharp. We don't have time for second guessing. The war beasts were almost at the door. Ren could hear their roars echoing through the halls. The creature was drawing closer as well, its eyes glowing brighter with every passing second. She could feel the pressure building inside the chamber, as if the very air itself was charged with an energy too powerful to contain. Oren hesitated, his hand hovering over the activation button. If I turn this on, it could either stop them, or it could make everything worse. Ren's gaze didn't waver. It's our only chance. He nodded, his face pale but resolute, and pressed the button. The room shuddered violently as the energy surged. The air was thick with power, crackling with a force that felt like it could tear the world apart. Ren's ears rang with the intensity of it. For a brief moment, everything went still, and then the building shook with a force that sent them all sprawling to the ground. Outside, the war beasts roared louder than ever before. Inside the chamber, the energy flared up, and for the first time, Ren could feel it something had changed. The power had been unleashed, but whether it would save them or doom them all was still to be seen. The silence that followed the power outage was suffocating. Ren's breath came in shallow gasps as she struggled to regain her bearings. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized, casting the room in a dim, eerie glow. The device, which had once hummed with an unimaginable power, now lay dormant. The air felt heavier, thick with an unseen pressure. Ren pushed herself to her feet, her heart racing. The war beasts were still out there, pounding against the walls of the facility, their roars vibrating through the floors. But the creature, that unnerving presence that had followed them from the shadows, it was nowhere to be seen. The calm, almost unnatural stillness hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. What happened? Lena asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Why did it stop? Dr. Oren's face was pale, his hand trembling as he reached toward the control panel. It's not supposed to stop, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The device was designed to... A sudden piercing scream cut him off, echoing through the facility like a blast of air. It was distant, yet unmistakably human. Ren's heart lurched in her chest as she instinctively grabbed her rifle, eyes scanning the darkened hallway. That came from the control room, Lena whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Ren didn't need to be told twice. She motioned for her team to follow and sprinted down the hall. The scream was followed by a series of urgent, panicked voices crackling over the comms. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As they turned the corner, they found the control room door ajar. The team's medical officer, Dr. Hale, was standing in the doorway, his face contorted in terror. Dr. Hale, Ren snapped. What's happening? What's going on? Hale didn't respond immediately. He was too busy staring at the scene inside the control room, his eyes wide with disbelief. Slowly, he stepped aside and Ren's eyes fell on what lay inside. The scientists' Oren's team were huddled together in a panic, their eyes locked on the central console. But it wasn't the console they were afraid of. It was the figure standing in the middle of the room. The creature, the one that had been hiding in the shadows, was no longer lurking in the dark. It was here, in the heart of the facility. Its form was no longer the sleek, predatory figure Ren had seen earlier. Now, it was towering, its body shifting, almost pulsating with energy. Its eyes glowed brighter than before, but this time, there was no malice in them, only curiosity. It had taken form, and it was speaking. The words were strange, unrecognizable at first, but as Ren stepped closer, she realized it wasn't speaking at all. The sounds it emitted were more like pulses, vibrations that seemed to penetrate her very soul. And then, in an instant, the pulse of energy shifted. Ren staggered back, her mind reeling. The creature, no, whatever it was not just connected to the energy source. It was the energy. It had been controlling the war beasts. But why? Was it trying to stop them, or was it something more complex? It didn't seem hostile, but its presence was suffocating, overwhelming. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. The creature's body began to distort, its limbs elongating, its skin shedding. Ren watched in stunned silence as the creature morphed, transforming right before her eyes into something altogether more human, almost like a person. The energy, which had once surged through it like a tidal wave, now seemed to recede, as if it were calming, or perhaps waiting for something. "Get back," Dr. Oren shouted, pushing Ren away from the door. "It's trying to merge with the device." But it was too late. The creature, or whatever it had, become extended, one hand toward the dormant device on the floor. The room hummed with the same deep pulse that had filled the air when the power had first surged. But now it was far stronger. Ren could feel the walls vibrating, the ground trembling beneath her feet. "Do you feel that?" Lena whispered, her voice shaky. "The energy. It's changing." Ren nodded, her mind racing. The creature was no longer a weapon, but something far more dangerous. It was a sentient being, a part of the energy itself, and now it had come to claim it. The war beasts outside had been mere pawns in its game, tools to distract them while it bided its time. "Dr. Oren." Ren's voice cut through the tense silence, but he was already moving toward the console, muttering something under his breath. "We need to stop it before it activates the device again." But Dr. Oren was no longer listening. He was fixated on the creature, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. "No, it's not. It's not just a weapon. It's a consciousness. A being. We've been wrong this whole time. This wasn't supposed to be a weapon. This was a signal." Ren's blood ran cold. A signal? But what kind of signal? Before she could ask, the creature's arm shot out, its fingers almost translucent with the energy now coursing through it. The console crackled, and sparks flew from the device. It was happening again. The energy was surging uncontrollably. This time, it wasn't just the war beasts they had to worry about. It was the energy itself, and the creature that had become its conduit. The lights flickered once more, and for a moment, Ren thought everything would go dark again. But what followed was far worse. The walls began to crack, the air grew thick and oppressive, and the very ground beneath them felt like it was collapsing into nothingness. The creature turned its glowing eyes toward Ren, and for the first time, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine, genuine emotion. Fear. A deep, overwhelming fear that mirrored her own. And then, just as the building seemed to quake with an otherworldly force, the creature whispered something that none of them could understand, before it disappeared into the shadows once more. Ren stood there, heart pounding, unable to move. The war beasts were coming. The device was unstable, and now the creature had disappeared, leaving them with more questions than answers. The most important one, still hanging in the air, what had it meant by its last words? What was it afraid of? Ren stood frozen, her mind spinning as the walls trembled beneath the weight of the energy surging through the facility. The creature's departure left her with more questions than answers, and the fear in its eyes still lingered in her mind. She could feel it, the building was on the brink of something catastrophic, and they were running out of time. "Move!" Ren shouted, snapping her soldiers out of their stunned silence. "We need to get to the control room. Now!" The team scrambled into action, but as they moved toward the main hallway, the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift. The entire facility was groaning, its structural integrity weakening under the intensity of the energy. The air felt suffocating, and Ren could hear the war beasts outside growing increasingly frantic. The control room was only a few meters away, but with every step they took, the vibrations seemed to grow stronger, more violent. Ren's mind raced. If they didn't stop this energy surge, it would tear the entire facility apart. She had to get to the device before the creature or whatever it was could complete whatever it had started. They burst into the control room, but what they found wasn't what they expected. Dr. Oren was standing at the center, staring at the device with wide, terrified eyes. It was pulsing with a bright, blinding light, a force so strong it felt like it was reaching into their very souls. "It's too late," Dr. Oren whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's activating the signal. It's calling them." "Who?" Ren asked, her voice tight with panic. "Who is it calling?" But before Dr. Oren could respond, the room shook violently, and the walls cracked open. Ren's heart skipped a beat as a massive shadow moved toward them from the far end of the room. It was the creature, but it wasn't the same as before. Its form had grown, expanded, as if it were absorbing the energy of the device. Its body was no longer a mere vessel. It was becoming something more. The creature's voice rang out, not through sound, but through pure force. It was a pulse that resonated deep within their bones. "You do not understand," the voice echoed. "I was not meant to be a weapon. I am the Guardian." Ren's pulse raced. Guardian? What was it guarding? The creature stretched its arm forward, reaching for the device. As its hand hovered above the console, Ren's mind flashed back to the first time they encountered it, the energy it had been drawing from. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't even a tool of war. It was something much older, something more powerful than they had ever imagined. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The creature wasn't trying to destroy them. It had been trying to stop them all along. The war beasts, the energy, the chaos, it had all been part of a greater plan to protect the planet from an even greater threat. The signal wasn't calling reinforcements, it was a warning. A warning that whatever was about to emerge from the depths of the universe was far worse than anything they had faced. And that was when the ground beneath them cracked wide open. The building groaned, its walls shuddering as a massive, deep rift tore through the earth. Ren watched in horror as the facility seemed to collapse inward, the structure breaking apart under the weight of the energy. The air grew thick with tension, the device now glowing brighter than ever before. The creature turned its glowing eyes toward Ren. "You must leave. You cannot stop it. But you can survive." Ren shook her head, still processing the creature's cryptic words. "What? What is coming?" Before the creature could answer, a blast of raw energy erupted from the rift below. It was unlike anything Ren had ever felt, colder, darker, a presence that seemed to consume everything in its path. And then, in the blink of an eye, something massive emerged from the depths. It was an alien ship. No, not a ship. A monstrous entity, a living being, its massive form unfathomable to the human eye. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating, as it loomed over them like a god from the void. The war beasts had been nothing compared to this. And then, as if sensing its arrival, the creature in front of Ren began to fade, its body dissipating into the air like smoke. The last thing Ren heard before the darkness swallowed her was the creature's voice, weaker now, but still resonating. "It is too late, but there is always a way." The ground shattered beneath them, and everything went black. When Ren came to, the first thing she saw was the sky. The stars above were no longer the same. The familiar constellations were gone, replaced by something unknown, something alien. She blinked, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but all she could see was the wreckage of the facility. Her team was scattered, and there was no sign of the creature or Dr. Oren. The war beasts, too, were nowhere to be found. But the immense ship, if that's what it could be called, still hovered in the distance, casting an enormous shadow over the remains of the planet. Ren staggered to her feet, her head pounding. She had no idea what had just happened, but she knew one thing for certain: the real battle was just beginning. As she looked out over the horizon, the dark ship's immense form reflected the dying light of the planet, and in that moment, Ren realized the true horror of what they were about to face. The creature had tried to warn them. The war beasts had been nothing more than a distraction. And now, with the full force of the unknown entity bearing down on them, Ren understood the creature's final message. It was never about the war. It was about survival. But survival from what? As the ship began to descend, a cold wind blew through the desolate landscape. The future was no longer in their hands. The question remained, could they stand against something so powerful, so ancient, that it was beyond human understanding? And as the shadows grew longer and the creature's final warning echoed in her mind, Ren knew they were running out of time. Ren stood at the edge of the ravaged facility, her mind still racing to process everything that had happened. The ship, now fully descended, loomed above them like an ancient behemoth, its dark shadow swallowing the remnants of the planet's light. The air was thick with tension, but there was no more time to wonder. The enemy was here, and it was impossible to ignore. Her team was regrouping, battered and disoriented, but still alive. Lena was tending to the injured, and the others were scanning the area, weapons drawn, ready for whatever came next. But there was an underlying fear in their eyes that Ren couldn't shake. They had faced the war beasts, fought their way through impossible odds, but nothing had prepared them for this. The real battle was only just beginning. The creature the Guardian had left them with more questions than answers. Its final message echoed in Ren's mind. She had thought it had been trying to warn them of an alien invasion, but now, standing beneath the vast looming entity, she realized the warning had been something far deeper. The creature hadn't just been trying to protect them from the threat outside. It had been trying to protect them from their own destruction. The war beasts, the device, the escalating energy, it had all been part of a larger plan to prepare humanity for what was coming. The real enemy was not the one they had been fighting, but something far older, far more insidious. As the ship began to hum, a deep vibration that rattled the bones of those nearby, Ren stepped forward, her team following closely behind. The creature's departure had left a void, but there was no time to mourn. They needed to act now, to reclaim what they could before the invasion wiped them out. There was one chance left to stop it. Ren had to take that chance, not just for her team, but for all of humanity. The ground shifted again, and the ship's enormous doors began to open, revealing a blinding light. From within, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, cloaked in shadows. As it stepped into the open, its shape became clearer, a being not quite human, but not entirely alien either. It was something in between, something that had walked the line between life and death for longer than Ren could comprehend. The figure raised its hand, and the ground around them trembled. "You will not survive this," the being's voice boomed, not with malice, but with a certainty that chilled Ren to her core. "But there is one who might." Before she could react, the figure raised a second hand, and a surge of energy pulsed outward, enveloping Ren and her team. For a brief moment, she thought it was over, that this was the end. But instead of pain, she felt something different. A connection. The creature had shown them the way, guided them through the chaos. And now, this being, whoever it was giving them the final push they needed to understand their purpose in this war. With a deep breath, Ren realized what she had to do. The time for fear had passed. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to reclaim the future, to protect what remained of humanity. As the energy surged through her, she nodded to her team. They were ready. They would face the darkness, armed with the knowledge they had gained, the strength of their unity, and the unwavering belief that they could overcome whatever lay ahead. The war was not over. It was only just beginning. And in the end, humanity would endure, as it always had,